Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm taking a look at a new collection from an amazing artist, Dawn Woleslagle, in collaboration with Spellbinders. Dawn is the owner of W+9. It is a stamp company with some amazing designs, and I'm a huge fan of her work. I was on the W+9 design team many years ago, and I still love their stamps. Dawn has her own unique signature style, and it is very feminine and very beautiful. If you look at some of my older videos here on my YouTube channel, you'll find some card ideas that I did years ago with Dawn's stamps. I'm so thrilled to see a collection of products designed by Dawn and manufactured by Spellbinders. The collection is called Seahorse Kisses, and it features just a handful of products, but boy, are they phenomenal. There are several Glimmer hot foil plate sets. There is a stamp set with coordinating dies and also a 3D embossing folder. My favorite Glimmer set is the one with sentiments. I just love the combination of fonts here, and the size of these sentiments is also great for cards. Sentiments read Starfish Wishes and Seahorse Kisses. You're simply amazing and thinking of you. You also have coordinating dies for each sentiment to cut them out, and the dies come together with a Glimmer plate, so you don't have to shop for them separately. Here, I foiled these in matte gold foil to show you how they look and also the size of these. So perfect for cards and also great to use with products you already have in your collection, especially that big thinking of you. It is a wonderful sentiment that goes together with pretty much anything. The next set in this collection is the Under the Sea Glimmer plate and coordinating die set. And here you have several plates of underwater images. You both have the individual fish as well as the little underwater groupings of seashells, fish, and plant life. And again, I foiled these and I cut them out to give you an idea of how they look. I especially love the individual fish images as these can be used outside of this set. I actually paired them with a 3D embossing folder for some other cards that I made, and I'll show you that in this video as well. Next, we have the Seahorse floral set with a large image of the seahorse styled with some flowers, seashells, and plants. This is a pretty big image. It fills an A2 card nicely. And you also have some sentiments in here. So sending you an ocean of thanks, or you have another option. You can do sending you an ocean of congrats. So you have two sentiment options, and these sentiments have coordinating dies. The seahorse image does not have a die. I love the font used for the thanks and the congrats. And these, again, can be used with other products that you have in your stash. So pretty versatile set. Next up, we have the 3D embossing folder. And the first time I saw this folder, and that was in Frankfurt at the Creative World show that took place this past February, I gasped. This folder design is simply amazing. It is so, it's so simple, but very unique at the same time. And the depth of the embossing here is just unbelievable. I also love that there's blank space available, so you can easily add a sentiment or an image in that corner. This is a big embossing folder. It measures 5.5 by 8.5 inches, so it works far beyond the A2 card size. And this also gives you various sections of the design that you can use for your cards. It is perfect for some summer cards, for vacation cards, really pretty design. And the last but not least product in this collection is a stamp set with coordinating dies called Seahorse Garden. So this, again, if you decide to purchase this set, it comes together with the coordinating dies right away, so you don't need to go looking for the coordinating dies separately. You have a nice selection of images here and two different sentiments to complement the stamps. And look at this card idea on the back of the packaging. It is so inspiring. In fact, I used the coloring from here, I used it as inspiration for a lot of the coloring that I did for my cards today. So a very beautiful collection, very true to Dawn's style. I cannot wait to see how Dawn is going to use it. I bet her cards are going to be very beautiful. Now, I have several card ideas for you in this video. I first wanted to do a card using the Seahorse image. So here I have foiled it in matte gold foil on the Simon Says stamp, 130-pound cardstock. This is the super smooth, extra thick cardstock. I love this paper for a lot of things, for stamping, for hot foiling, for ink blending, also for alcohol marker coloring. It has never let me down. And this is pretty much the only paper that I use when I know I want to color something with alcohol markers, because I know that I will have good results even with poor coloring skills. So this paper just does the work for me. I picked some Copic markers and also some Olo markers to color this image. Now, I mentioned in one of my previous videos that I now use both Copics and Olos because I find that I can complement the Copic collection with the Olo collection. For example, I don't have perfect pinks when I color with Copic markers, but I do have that perfect pink in my Olo collection, so I use both brands. Here, I'm using my go-to Copic marker colors, starting with a YG67, that's my darkest green, adding YG17, my medium green, and blending it all out using my lightest YG03. I'm not going to show you the entire coloring process. It takes me quite a while to color this, but I enjoyed the coloring. You know, I enjoy coloring when there's no pressure to make it look perfect. And when my camera is turned on, I try to make it look perfect and I mess up. So whenever I'm filming, I will just film a part of my coloring, then I will turn the camera off and continue working on my design until I'm happy with it. So I will first get in really close. If I'm not filming, I can have my head over the image and I can see better what I'm doing. And then I'll add additional layers of color. I'll add some more shading. I can do more blending. Here, for example, you can see the comparison. I worked on the seaweed on camera. I turned the camera off and I worked on it some more. And now the shadows are much deeper and there's more definition to this image. So that's basically how I color everything that you see colored on my YouTube channel. Next, I tried using Olo markers because I wanted to have a different shade of green, but that didn't really work for me. The color wasn't what I wanted, and I also overblended. And so that resulted in a little bit of bleeding, and that even lifted some of the foiling from my image. You can see that here. So do not overdo it. Do not overblend over a foiled image because you might remove some of the foiling. It's kind of the same like coloring over heat embossing. You know, you don't want to overblend because the alcohol from your alcohol marker might dissolve the embossing powder. Now, I never noticed this before, that alcohol markers can remove foiling, but I'm also just learning my Olo markers, and I very much love using them. They're very convenient, but there are little things to know when you use them. So I went back to Copics for these leaves, and here I just switched to a different marker combo to have a slightly different shade of green. And I used a G99, G94, and YG03, and this gave me a darker green for those leaves. I also used the same colors to cover the previously colored leaf, the one that I tried to color using Olos, and that seemed to work okay, and it fixed the coloring here. Next, I had another groupings of leaves, and again, I used different shades of green. You don't want to use the same green markers and the same green colors for all of the different greenery on your image, especially if you have different types of greenery, because greenery is not the same. You know, it's not all the same color. There are different shades of green. Some greenery is more true green, some is more yellow green, some is more muted green, some is very dark, and some is very light, and so on. So to make your coloring look better and more realistic, use different shades of green for different types of greenery. That's why if you like to color, it's important to have more than 3 green markers. So while my go-to colors and markers are YG67, YG17, and YG03, I also have other green markers to give me that ability to color greenery in different shades of green. So here I used YG17, YG03, and YG01. So it's pretty much the same color combo as I used for the first greenery that I colored, but I skipped on the darkest color and added a much lighter one instead. And that, again, gave me a slightly different look. Next, I colored the seashells and I used the image on the packaging for reference. The seashells are colored beautifully here, and I tried to follow this example using the colors that I had in my stash to mimic this look. Now, it did not exactly work in the same way, but it looked fine in the end. I used E31, E33, E37, and later I added a darkest brown for my stash, the E79. I also used the E00. And I think the key here is to do strokes of color with very little blending. And these strokes is what adds detail to the image. You know, you can create shadows with the darker strokes. You can create highlights with the lighter strokes. And it is just a fabulous way to color, you know, using strokes instead of blending. It's a different way to color. I have a video on my YouTube channel where I do this stroke type of coloring to color a hibiscus flower, and the result is just fabulous. I share lots of tips in that video, and I have linked here for you in case you've not seen it or in case you want to refresh your memory. Next, I colored the seahorse using reds. I used R24, R22, and R20 colors. I also used a lot of the 0 or colorless blender marker, and I went over the finished image with the 0 marker to remove a lot of the color, as that R24 seemed a little bit too much, you know, a little bit too bright for this card. Now, I also followed the example on the packaging. Again, the seahorse is colored beautifully there. By the way, you can also look up examples on the Spellbinders website. They always have beautiful card ideas and they're very inspiring. So if you are stuck, if you're lacking inspiration, if you don't know how to color your image, go to the website, look up that product and see if there are some examples by the product designer or by other artists and see how it was colored. If you can't find anything there, you can also go to Pinterest and just type the, seahorse illustration. I like to do seahorse illustration or seahorse cartoon or seahorse coloring and look up ideas there. So I followed the example on the packaging to help me color the seahorse. I probably should have used some lighter colors, but once I finished coloring the entire image, I actually quite like the bright reds that I used here. So it all worked out in the end. I also colored the other seashell using the same brown markers that I used before. You can definitely use other colors, maybe do a pink seashell or a teal seashell. That would look really pretty. I wanted to do colors that were more true to life, so I went with browns, although these are probably a little bit too dark browns for a seashell, but it all looked good. Next, I used yellow markers, and here I'm using an Olo yellow marker to color the yellow flower. On the finished card, you'll see that one of the flowers is actually orange, more orange red, and that's because I felt I did not have enough red here, with the seahorse being so dark red. So I colored one of the yellow flowers using red markers, and that of course turned the flower orange. I love that. I don't have a lot of orange markers in my stash, and I typically stay away from orange as I can never get a good orange blend. But doing it this way, first coloring the flower yellow and then adding red on top, that worked out beautifully, and it gave me some really nice natural colors to this flower. Now, I also colored the background. So not the entire background, but I just added some light blue shading around the image. I first used a very pale blue from Olo. That helped saturate the paper with ink, and it did add a little bit of color. You can't really see it. I mean, it was very faint. So that's why I later added BG11 Copic marker to add more teal to the background, and also some BG32, and I concentrated that very closely to the image outline. So the further it went from the image itself, the lighter the color became. Adding this teal shading helped the image stand out. Otherwise, it was kind of getting lost on that white background. So adding the teal helped create the illusion of the background for me. Now, I trimmed this panel using a rectangle die from Spellbinders, and I foam mounted my panel onto an A2 white card base. I also added a ton of white dot detail. I used my Sakura Jelly Roll pen in size 0.5. And that's the moment when I realized I did not like the yellow flowers. So I came in with my red markers, the same red that I used to color the seahorse, and I colored over that flower. And by the way, I also used R27, so an even darker red to intensify some of the red shadows. I foam mounted the sentiment that reads, "Sending you an ocean of thanks." I really like that this sentiment has dies for both parts of the sentiment, giving me the opportunity to pop my sentiment up over my background image. Not much else was done here to finish this card. I just added some aura sequence from Spellbinders, and it really helped tie everything together. Love it. Now for my second card, I started by doing some ink blending using the Seafoam ink from Simon Says Stamp. I'm blending here on the same cardstock. So this is the Simon Says Stamp 130 pound cardstock. I'm adding ink blending just from the bottom of the panel. I want the ink blending to gently fade into white and create the illusion of water. Now I also have already colored the images from Under the Sea Glimmer set. And my idea here is to use them to fill the background and then place a sentiment in the center. Now, before I do that, I want to foam mount this panel onto an A2 card base. I'm using a layer of white fun foam here. This is the Spellbinders pop-up foam die cutting sheets. And this foam is actually really good for die cutting, but I also like to use it to add dimension to my die cut panels. Now, I colored one fish black and yellow, and I didn't really like that. You know, it didn't go with the rest of the coloring here. It just looked out of place. So I needed to do something about it. And I just planned to cover that part with a sentiment panel. Because why waste a perfectly good image if the rest of it is good? You know, only a section of this image is not good. It's okay. It just doesn't go with my card. So I'm not going to recolor the whole thing if I can cover the section that I don't like. You know, I can just cover it up with another element. And of course, I needed room for a sentiment here. So I just placed a sentiment over it, and it happened to be in the center of my panel. So it all worked out perfectly. I also added my additional individual fish, and I embellished this card using the Spellbinders sequence in teal, and this color worked really well with that light teal ink blending in the background. Love it. I have two more cards for you, and these focus more on the hot foiling techniques and the dry embossing with the 3D embossing folders. So here I have two panels of Spellbinders Glacier cardstock. These are cut to 4¼ by 5½ inches, and they will make the front of my card. I really love this cardstock color. It is very soft and subtle, and honestly, it's one of my favorite cardstock colors from Spellbinders to use for my cards. I use it a lot. Now, I also have the Sentiment Glimmer plates from the Seahorse Kisses Sentiment set, and I'm going to pair these with the 3D embossing folder from this collection to create very clean and simple cards. Now, I first need to foil my sentiments, and I'm planning my sentiment placement here. I'm using the opaque white foil for one of the cards, and then matte gold foil for the other card. Now, the white foil is kind of hard to see on camera. It's hard to see on photos too, but it looks spectacular in real life. You know, it is also a bit pressed into the paper, giving you a little bit of that letterpress look. You know, absolutely fantastic. I'm telling you guys, I love it. And by the way, white foil, it looks almost as white heat embossing, but while white heat embossing is popped up on the card slightly, you know, because you are adding a layer of embossing powder, the white foiling is pressed into the paper. So it looks similar, but also different at the same time. Now, I also have two fish images or two fish glimmer plates, and I want to foil these in matte gold foil on white, but I also want to reuse the negative foil and foil the negatives as well. Now, whenever I want to foil the negatives, I'm being very careful with the tape that I use to tape my plates to the foil and to the paper, because tape can really mess up your foil and you might not have a good enough piece that you can use for the negative foiling. So my trick here is to use the thin yellow tape. So this is thin yellow tape from Spellbinders, and use just really small pieces of tape and not over tape anything. So I'm trying to be minimal here. I'm trying to make sure that I do not add too much tape, because when I go to remove that tape, it can really damage my foil. So I went ahead and I foiled the sentiments. Look at this white on light blue. Doesn't it look gorgeous? You know, I love the subtle color combination. It's very classy, very elegant. I also foiled the matte gold on light blue, and that looks just as good. The gold does look a little bit more pronounced on the light blue cardstock, and I love that. I also foiled the fish images, and with the foiling done, I was very careful when removing the tape from the plates and the foil. Now, I also placed one solid glimmer plate from Spellbinders. This happens to be a square solid plate. I needed it for the negative foiling technique. Spellbinders has several of these negative solid plates. They come in various shapes, basic shapes. Pinkfish Studio also has a big solid plate, and this is basically used to do negative foil transfer. It's great for techniques. It's a great way to not waste any foil, and also to get a different look using your glimmer plates. So here I was super careful to remove my foil. You can see it is perfectly intact, and I placed it on the solid plate. I place it pretty side down. I then add my paper. I'm still using that same Simon Says stamp, 130-pound cardstock, and I covered it all with my glimmer shims. Now, this solid negative plate, the key here is to heat up this plate a little longer. Oftentimes, I like to heat it up twice so that I get that perfect foil transfer. With the other plates, when I was heating them, I followed the Glimmer Hot Foil System instructions precisely. So I pressed the timer button, and as soon as it turned solid green, as soon as it stopped flashing, I took my platform out of the docking station and I sent it through my die cutting machine to foil. Had I kept it there a little bit longer, I could have risked overfoiling. And when you want to do the negative foil transfer, you need to make sure that you don't get any overfoiling, because if you are getting overfoiling, that means you're also pulling the foil away from the sheet that you plan to reuse for the negative foil transfer. So it's very important to get a good initial foiled result. Now here, because there's no way we can get overfoiling, we just need to get all of the foil that's on our piece of foil. We need to get all of it onto our paper. So there's no risk of getting overfoiling. So we can heat the plate for as long as we want. And I find I like to heat it once, and I might heat it again just to be sure. So next I used coordinating dies, and I cut the little fish out. This time I'm not doing any coloring. I'm keeping the fish as is. So matte gold on white. The fish are just going to be there to accent the card design. They're not the focal point, hence why there's no need to color them. And here's a look at the negative foiled fish. Being very careful here to remove the clear film that was holding the foil, and I can go ahead and cut these out using the coordinating dies. So I used just one foil plate, but I have two different looks with the help of the solid plate and the negative foil transfer. It's a fabulous technique. It's a little bit tricky to master. It doesn't work every single time, but it is absolutely worth it. Okay, let's go back to the backgrounds. So the next step is to dry emboss our backgrounds. Now, the key to good embossed look when using a 3D embossing folder is adding a little bit of moisture to the paper. I have seen Jennifer McGuire use a wet baby wipe to add moisture to the paper, so I'm using her trick here. I'm using a wet baby wipe, and I'm wetting the paper on both sides. I'm not wetting the area with the sentiment, just the other area that I plan to emboss. You can also spray the paper with water, use a water mister, and lightly mist your paper with water. Make sure you mist both front and back. And what this does is it helps the paper fibers to loosen, and they end up stretching instead of breaking when you send your paper through your die cutting machine. So your embossed result looks better if you've wet the paper before sending it through the machine. Next, I place the paper inside the folder, making sure that I pick the part of the design that I like the most. And I use my die cutting machine and the universal plate system to emboss it. Now, you do need to have the universal plate system to use these new 3D embossing folders from Spellbinders. You can try and shim your current plates to find an optimal sandwich if you don't have the universal plate system. But I will tell you that you will have much better results, more consistent results if you use this system. Now here I use the new Platinum 6 die cutting and embossing machine. This is my video machine, meaning I use it only when I'm filming. So I'm really not using it that much. Whenever I'm not filming, I have a big Platinum off to the side. It's a machine that I have had for several years. And what I'm trying to say here is this new Platinum that I'm using on video, it has a little bit more pressure. It's practically a brand new machine. So it has more pressure compared to my old Platinum. And you can see the paper cracked a little bit. Even though I wet the paper, it's still cracked. When I use this same paper in this same folder, and when I wet the paper the same way, but used my old Platinum die cutting machine, it embossed the paper without giving me the cracks. So I think the pressure there is not as strong as in my new Platinum 6. The point of all of this is, if you are embossing with these 3D embossing folders and you have your paper cracking, maybe try using an older machine if you have one and see if that makes any difference. I'm sure it will. Next, I added some faint inking to the embossed design by using a white pigment ink pad. Now, because this cardstock is so light, you can barely see the white on there. So I used a Simon Says Stamp white pigment ink pad, and I swiped the ink pad gently over the embossing to help highlight the raised embossed ropes. Now, I also did some corner ink blending for the other panel using the Seafoam ink, and I just ink blended the non-embossed section with the sentiment. This added quite a lot of interest to my background. So here are the two backgrounds side by side. Love this look. Next, I have a little trick that I like to use whenever I have an embossed panel. Embossed panels tend to have a little bit of warping, they tend to warp. So I generally try to flatten the paper by adding several sheets of cardstock from behind in between my paper and the card base. So here I have 2 sheets of scrap cardstock. They're glued together, and these are cut just slightly smaller than my panels. And I'll use them to add sturdiness to the embossed panel, to help flatten my embossed panel, and also to help add some weight to my card. Now, I typically hand deliver my cards, or if I mail them in a box with a gift. So the weight of the card doesn't really matter to me. But if you plan to mail your card in an envelope, maybe skip this extra layer of cardstock to avoid having to pay extra postage fees. So I then added my foiled fish over the background next to the sentiments. I used foam adhesive squares to pop them up, and I embellished both of my cards using the Spellbinders sequence in Aura. And that finishes my cards for today. I hope you enjoyed this look at the Seahorse Kisses collection by Dawn Woleslagle and Spellbinders. I hope you feel inspired to create. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.